I'm Terry Weipert. I'm at Accenture, and I primarily focus on our health and public service practice in North America. But I also sit on our global cloud leadership team for Accenture, and it's always, I was looking at my calendar this week, and I was looking at the number of cloud calls I had with around the country, and even though the government presented some of the approach to cloud, I'll tell you from a vendor perspective, and specifically Accenture, from a outsourcing, managed service, strategic partner perspective, there is a lot of work still to do. And so that's what we thought we would try and stay focused on. We concur that it's an improved alignment or balance with capital, operational improvements, managed services, mission priorities. Many commercial clients are looking at this. We'll also say, and I'll say it actually because I say it a lot, is that it's a journey too, and another phrase, it's a 3 to 5 year journey. It's not something overnight necessarily, unless maybe it's just, the phrase I use a lot is I was able to volunteer at my son's school, put up the crew website, I got the email set up, and we were able to post the regatta schedules really fast. I suppose that was a cloud capability that we did offer, but it was 110 a year, so I don't think that that was exactly all about it. Also, it's a little bit about driving out the costs that we've heard about, but the license models maybe aren't quite there yet. The whole procurement side of things is a bit of a challenge as well. And then, of course, the IT maturity across all the different agencies. And I talked to many different agencies, and everyone as it is at a different level of maturity. So my panel, I'm going to now turn to them and ask them to introduce themselves quickly, and then we're going to try and focus on some questions that we hope will get a little bit edgy or kick it up from a vendor perspective.
Okay. And yes, I can hear you now. I'm Randy Hahn with Verizon, and we'll be, one of the things we do want to talk about today, and hopefully, is about the adoption capabilities and the everything as a service direction that we're taking, not only for our customers, but also internally. So we're consuming our own water, if you speak, when it comes to cloud.
Susie Adams, I'm the CTO for Microsoft Federal Sales.
Gunnar, Hellekson, I'm the Chief Technology Strategist for Red Hat's public sector.
Srinivas Reddy, Federal Solutions Architect for Amazon. Dan Burton, Senior VP Global Public Policy, Salesforce.com.
David Mihalchik, Strategy and Business Development Executive from Google.
All people that we work with on a regular basis, actually, and partner with. So thank you. I'm going to throw out the first question, and the way I sent it to all the panelists was basically, how does cloud computing impact, as we understand it, certainly our various clients' requirements, but more importantly, it's basically our strategy and approach and investment. So let me turn it over to whoever wants to take that one on first. Susie? No?
She said, first. Staring at Susie.
So can you repeat the question?
Sure. So from our knowledge and perspective on our clients' requirements for cloud computing, what's our strategy and approach and our investments? What are we doing?
So I think, I guess a couple of things, and I guess I'll speak to federal since we're pretty much in a federal audience, I believe. We probably have some state and local here too. But if we look at what Microsoft's doing, and I'll say also Microsoft and our partners, many of which are actually sitting here, because contrary to some folks, even though we may compete, just very similar to how we operate in the on-premise world, we also partner. A great example is Amazon. Some of the work that we did with recovery.gov and treasury.gov actually runs on Amazon, which is kind of interesting from a cloud perspective. So I guess I'll name 3 different things. One, obviously, we're building services, and we're building those services to meet federal requirements. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have as service providers, is trying to determine exactly what those requirements are, because they're a little bit in flux. And we've heard that kind of throughout the day when we talk about security controls, where we stand with FedRAMP, and which controls you really need to focus on. Should it be the moderate, or should it be low? Which workloads should fall on moderate and low, and things of that nature. And then what should those services look like, right, from a cloud perspective? Should they be a shared tenancy model? Do they require to be in a dedicated model? And then how do we take those and package them up so they're very easy to consume, right, for our federal customers? I'd say that I think the biggest challenge that we have when working with federal customers is that a lot of people expect the cloud, one, to be easy, and Teresa, as you pointed out, and to be fast. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done on the agency side before they can actually consume a cloud service. Great examples are just directory services, right, across many of the agencies. To be able to consume cloud services and be able to talk outside your own agency, which is in itself sometimes very difficult for agencies to do these days because of a lot of the historical aspects of being able to get to the internet and how you get to the internet and vice versa coming in. A lot of those things actually need to be taken care of, and you actually need to clean house internally a little bit before you can consume those services in a reliable manner. And then I guess the third thing I'll say is that we live in a heterogeneous world, and I think that all of the vendors here will tell you, and even the partners, that what you're going to see, right, is heterogeneous, meaning solutions that have multiple vendors involved, whether they're cloud vendors, as well as on-premise workloads all working together. Right? So it's not a go to the cloud, you're going to get, we're going to do everything for you in a box, and you're going to be able to plug and play, maybe like you think your cell phone can, where you can just switch providers in a day. It gets a little bit more complicated the higher up the stack you go from an enterprise perspective.
Thank you. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, just from a requirements perspective, I think the biggest thing is the government is required to do more with less now. So for that, cloud is a phenomenal option. With low cost, you can do a lot more. From meeting the needs from a security perspective, there are questions like, I think Sony raised one just a little while back, is flipping the model of sharing more and locking down less. So it's about opening up security, thinking outside the boundary security model. Again, the solutions that we offer now are very much akin to that. And then, definitely from a security requirements perspective, embracing the FISMA requirements, FedRAMP, they're right up there, just giving the government what they need in terms of getting us certified and getting the agencies use these services much quicker.
Anybody else? Randy,
Yeah, absolutely. From a Verizon standpoint, it's the federal story is the same as our commercial story, is the same as our internal story. The organization has invested quite a bit of capital, intellectual, with the vendor community, and internally to build infrastructure, which is, being from the phone company history and background, that's what we do. So the computing infrastructure, the storage infrastructure, and leveraging all those combinations together is something that the company is going to move forward with very aggressively the rest of this year and then for the foreseeable future. The federal space of that we're taking is we are replicating, not sharing the same infrastructure approach for our federal customer and client. So we are standing up dedicated federal nodes that will do nothing more than support just the federal space. We will not be putting commercial customers in there, but we have created an internal process so the advances and the way to leverage the technology that we build on the commercial side, we migrate over onto the federal side of the organization. So again, Verizon's trying to move aggressively into everything as a service, not just computing and not just storage, but eventually mobility and all those other pieces of it that match. And again, it's an infrastructure approach, and our view is not necessarily every cloud is equal. Clouds are created to do certain things right now. And the hybrid, I was very encouraged by the COO panel. One of the issues they brought up was the ability to move between clouds, be a little more heterogeneous. And I think that's one of the things you're going to see advances in the technology space the next year or so is that ability to pick up and move between different clouds, virtual images. And I think that's one of the next things on the horizon. And I know that's, for us, that's one of the big things we're looking at too, especially when you look at enterprise data center level activity.
Yeah, I think that's actually an excellent example of if people want the interoperability, these investments have to be made, and they're not complete yet in many different areas. So that's a good one. Why don't I move on, because I think this one I want to talk about for a little bit. But we did, of course, ask ourselves what are the top 3 challenges for our clients, but more importantly, what are the top 3 challenges for us? And I can comment from an Accenture perspective, but and I was commenting to my teammates here too that I was with a client the other day who wanted us just to pick up their application, move it infrastructure as a service, and take it over. But their application wasn't performing. I can't solve their problem if we don't take a look at the application and all the issues associated with first. Just moving it to the cloud actually doesn't either reduce cost or improve, the whole service perspective on it. So some of the challenges I see is getting people to understand exactly what steps they can take, what their strategy should be around that. So that's just one example. Go ahead. You raise your hand. So.
Is that nice? Okay. I think one of the, people often mention when they're talking about consuming cloud services, and actually I'm in a weird position here because I think I'm the only person who doesn't actually offer like a formal cloud service. I think I'm just a tool guy. So that'll be interesting. So one of the hazards, of course, is the hazard of lock-in, right? And the standards are ill-defined, and this is very early days for the technology, and so there is a danger now of a lot of agencies conflating consolidation with standardization. That is, consolidating on one vendor and having that be a proxy for the kind of flexibility you get from standardization. So this kind of early adoption of this like early and in some cases mature, but in many cases immature technology, especially in the area of portability and interoperability. I think finding new and interesting ways of hedging those bets, as you move an application into the cloud, disentangling it from the rest of your infrastructure so it's a little easier to move around. I think what a lot of people didn't anticipate is it may be easy to move into a virtual machine hosted by someone else or even into a private cloud, but don't anticipate the amount of re-architecting they may have to do in order to actually make that worthwhile and get all the possible gains out of it.
Anybody else want to comment on that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
So, I hear the the standardization and the worry about lock-in. The way I look at it is, just for the non-cloud world, right? How many times do we think about running something on a Dell server versus a HP server, right? At that level, there is no lock-in. There's less of a concern. As you go up, right, then you start getting worried about, is it a Java platform or a Microsoft platform or Windows platform? So the cloud, in that sense, is no different in terms of where you get in. You could get in at pure infrastructure control without lock-in. You just migrate your applications. Now, the challenge in terms of migrating is what you're talking about. If it's a legacy application that does not take advantage of all the advantages that inherently cloud offers, like redundancy and designing for failure, then you're not making the best use of it. But literally, if you spin up a Windows server and host your iOS server on it, it's no different from what you would do in your data center.
Right.
I think both of you guys make really good points. I think the challenge, I think the biggest challenge I know Microsoft faces, and I think all the vendors face, is the way that people define cloud. So if you look at a lot of the RFPs that have come out lately, unless they're for commodity-based services like just pure email and calendar, and things that are really just core services themselves and have been offered really in the federal space as you could almost call them services by the SI community, the systems integrator community, and a traditional hosted way, just not with all the characteristics of cloud. What we're seeing is you're getting these RFPs that are traditional hosted services requirements with a sprinkle of cloud on top. Right? And so we try to, it's almost like putting a round peg in a square hole, and everybody's trying to mash this into a cloud, but yet all the requirements are like, we want to come in and touch the servers. We want to come in and do this. They all the characteristics don't match. And I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is that everybody's still a little bit nervous in government to relinquish some of the control that has to be relinquished. There were some good comments made in the last panel where, it's really all about SLAs. It's not about, what is actually running under there. And if you think about, when we talk about vendor lock-in, the standards efforts have been underway for a long time. There aren't really any new standards. So there are talks about, new standards that will evolve because of the cloud, and I think everybody agrees they will. But we're really still basing things on the web services standards, right, and the web standards that have evolved over the last 15 years. And all the vendors are playing in that space. So the whole lock-in argument it can almost be, boiled down to a traditional type of standards argument. And if you start to look at things like, I'll give Azure as an example. We have a platform we call Azure. Think of it as Windows in the cloud, right, with our hypervisor technology. And we just announced that you can run Drupal, right, in our cloud, virtualized on the Azure stack, right? That's not anything Microsoft, right, in our cloud. Right? Amazon can run all of our stack. We partner with Verizon, and they actually take some of our software and run it in a dedicated cloud. And so the rules have changed. I don't think everybody's quite got their arms around it.
Susie, I need you to check your mic too. I just got can you check and make sure it's on? I love that. I feel like I got a cue card.
You did.
I did.
Actually, so if I could, I want to make another point about the lock-in, because I think everything you say is exactly true. The adoption of web standards and RESTful interfaces and things like that do encourage a lot more interoperability than we had before. I think it's also true, though, that when you standardize on something like .NET, which in some cases you have to do if you're going to move into the platform as a service part of Azure, or if you standardize on the EC2 interface for Amazon, you have all these different kind of management tools that you need to be using to manipulate each of these environments. And so the lock-in comes not necessarily from the environment that you're running in, but the tools you need to manipulate it, right?
Actually, inside, and I'm not sure that that's exactly true, because in the Amazon and even in Azure, Ruby, Python, Perl, Eclipse, we can run Apache web servers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really, it's your choice. It's really not.
Yeah, I guess this is why it's interesting having a tools guy on the panel, because if a systems administrator is manipulating a particular cloud environment, he may be using Python or Ruby or even hosting a Python or Ruby application, whatever it is. But at the same time, if he needs to use the Amazon interface or the say the Salesforce, or say the Force.com interface or the Azure interface in order to spin up machines, shut down machines, and so on, each of those interfaces are slightly different, right? Are going to be manipulated in a slightly different way. Yeah. So the lock-in is up at the management layer anyway.
So those are some of the challenges of it. David, do you have any? You and I know each other actually from our meeting.
Right.
Anything you want to add on the from a challenge perspective?
I think what we've seen, the challenges have really gone away. I mean, I've just been kind of sitting here contemplating this. I've been at Google for 4 years, and when we first started, I was told I was crazy. Terry and I used to work together, and I was told I was just a crazy guy for going to Google and focusing on the government, because really cloud computing was not really possible in the government and the public sector, and over 4 years, we introduced Google Apps 4 years ago, and we've seen just the opposite. Kind of every time the playbook was predetermined and written, something different happened. So we've seen enormous adoption in the public sector of cloud computing, and first we saw it with state and local governments, and now we're seeing it in the federal government as well. So we have 38 states that are now using Google Apps. We have at least 5 federal agencies that are using Google Apps as well. Most recent announcement, the General Services Administration, which is leading the government's effort, or the president's effort government-wide for cloud computing, they announced that they're migrating their internal mail system and collaboration system to Google Apps, after doing a full competition about a year long and evaluating all the technologies that were available. Since this time and in the period of this 4 years, Google was able to FSMA certify our Google Apps Cloud for the federal government at the moderate baseline. We were the first to do this in industry for a offering that we have in the area of message and collaboration, and we're still the only provider that has this capability for both the infrastructure and the applications together. So I think that agencies are recognizing that the biggest challenge is how do we move forward and do this, and their biggest challenges are actually with the technology that they have today, because they're paying more for a technology that is not as powerful. And,
right. I think the challenge too is related to the transformation all coming together, and trying to do it in an effective way, quickly and overnight.
And there are challenges. I think those challenges are very similar to the challenges with on-premise technology, or just technology in general, because we've seen it happen a number of times.
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different view of that. And I think the gentleman who pointed up at the last part of the presentation from the government side of the house brought up a very good point about the culture, the funding approach, the budgeting approach. Because again, as we kind of talked when we started, you have different providers up here providing different types of clouds. So for the application side of the house, I would agree. They're getting more comfortable because it's very focused sort of on one layer. When you get to the platform and the infrastructure pieces, which is a lot more flexible, a lot more capability there, and you're bringing in those apps and trying to migrate those in, I think that's where the government's still challenged a little bit for how do you do that, especially on the funding side and the budgeting side. And I'll give you a perfect example because we bid on the GSA BPA. One of the requirements in there was that set thresholds and potentially, turn off service at a point in time, and because of the funding issue. And that's a challenge, and that's something that's going to have to be broken down and addressed on the government side moving forward. The other piece, I think, gets back to, I call it cloud confusion or every cloud being equal from the standpoint of what are you trying to do? And I think sometimes when technologies come out, there's a tendency to focus on the technologies and to kind of be wowed by the technologies. But the end, when you come back, and I hate to use the end of the day, but I just did, it's still a business issue. What's the mission you're trying to accomplish? What are you trying to do? And a good example we had with one of our folks, our customers, was that they had a large database, they had an application, and they had some web users. Well, we can't move that to the cloud. Well, you probably can't move the database, right? It's not going to virtualize very well, and it's pretty tight. The applications we have to look at and then really make a determination if you can and what you can. But the web interface, you can. So you can tie it together. So having those hybrid models works, but you have to be able to work through that process. I was encouraged by listening to the CIO panel because it sounds like several of those individuals kind of get that approach, but I'm not sure everybody gets that at every level. So I think there's a couple challenges there into the transformation piece. You're right, it's kind of a perfect storm. We've got the technology,
Teresa,
we've got transformation.
Yeah.
Can I weigh in?
Yes, you can.
Is my mic working? Can everyone hear me?
I
think I'd associate myself with David's comments when you look at challenges for the U.S. federal government. Our first government customer was the State Department 5 years ago. I think today 10 of the 15 cabinet agencies run on Salesforce.com cloud computing application. So there has really been a very broad adoption of this. And there is still concerns about procurement and lock-in and standards. And I think those discussions will always be with us, actually. But I think that there is a very powerful shift that has taken place inside federal agencies, and that was the culture used to be such that, oh my goodness, the cloud is a risk. I can't do this. I need to ask permission. I'm sort of stepping out of the mainstream if I adopt cloud solutions. And I think with the work that Vivek Kundra is doing, especially the cloud first policy, suddenly federal agencies feel that they are empowered, they do have permission. And you certainly heard that with the CIO Council up here on the stage earlier today. And so I think that the challenge has actually, and I pick up on what Randy said here a little bit, I think the challenge facing a lot of federal agencies and CIOs today is noise, because suddenly every single application imaginable is a cloud application. And so if you are a CIO and you're trying to think, okay, so how do I get the scale and the promised price advantages and the speed advantages and the innovation, how does that all work? And you heard Veterans Affairs saying, well, if you go to a private cloud, you can forget it. You're not going to get the cost advantages. That's the same price that you're looking at with traditional client server software. So I think that CIOs are really struggling in this new environment to sort of figure out what are bona fide cloud solutions that deliver the promise, scalability, speed, cost advantages, and innovation.
I agree, but I also will tell you, I think the challenges from our side, if you will, or the provider's side in all this is the whole return on investment and some of the things people are asking. There are two particular things that are always of concern. One is, have we made the investment in the tools and the governance and the program management and the change management and all those things that are required to manage this environment? And then has there been real coding done so that we can give answers back to people? Because they're going to want to know eventually, and I know the procurement's going to catch up, but the procurement still is not set up, or the appropriations is not set up by the SIP. Okay, and until that happens, and then also from a vendor side, until we start billing by the SIP, right, per se, things are going to still be a little bit off here. So I think these are challenges that we're facing, and when we talk to our vendors and we talk to the partners that we deal with, but all hasn't been resolved yet. So just a general comment, just to tell you it's not, it's not all done yet. Let's move on to the. There was another thing, and I heard a little bit of this in some earlier sessions, but are there specific applications better enabled by cloud offerings? Now, I don't want to stick with email and those traditional ones. I'm talking about, you know, when you move into, and somebody asked a question I thought was interesting, where the application's in the cloud, but the data stays, you know, local kind of thing. The whole platform conversation hasn't been really addressed in great detail. You can do some specific applications, but I spend a lot of time talking about citizen-centric services and on a global basis, frankly, because some of the citizen-centric type revenue type service or applications and things like that are used by every country, the Department of Defense, border control, things like those things are to me, another future for us. Anybody want to comment on that?
I have, that's a great point, and the gentleman that asked the question earlier about that was, I think, right on target. You know, it's not a, I'll give you two examples. One is, you know, data.gov as it exists today and what everybody's doing around just open data, right, and where that data lives. There was a time when everybody thought that for data to be open, you'd have to take it and put it in a big giant, you know, data warehouse somewhere, and that's how you would go and search it, and there'd be a set of tools on top of it, and that's what you'd look at. Today, what you'll see, and there's several different vendors that now have solutions out there. Socrata is one of them, right? We have something called Data Marketplace. That data doesn't necessarily have to live in a cloud. In fact, it doesn't matter where it lives because it's based on open standards, right? Web service protocols and published APIs, so that you can actually have a web-based interface that you can then literally grab data from anywhere, munge it, and view it all and it doesn't matter where it lives as long as it's open. The other interesting, I think, case study here, or case for an application is records management. Mm-hmm. If you look at all the challenges around records management, you know, and I won't get into what defines a record and what doesn't define a record, right, and all the challenges that everybody has around that today in the federal government. But if you just say that everything defines a record, all those records can live, they're going to live in clouds, right, different vendor clouds, they're going to live in different applications. Some of them are going to be, you know, hybrid applications that live both in the cloud and not in the cloud, and you're going to need to be able to do e-discovery on all of that, and you're not going to want to take all that data and have to load it into a single database to do that, right? And so I think you're going to start to see some really cool applications. And the other thing I'm going to say, you said something in the beginning that I thought was hilarious. You said I'm not going to talk about email and those types of traditional cloud apps. Yeah. Traditional and cloud. I was like, okay.
I did that. I was sort of smiling, you know, I did do that actually, because we do speak a little bit about all the other applications and the mission. Because actually the bulk of the dollars are there, so that's why, you know, I think there's some, I hate to use this phrase, but you know, sort of the low-hanging fruit kind of thing. But there's those conversations, and those things are the first steps.
Well, they're well, yes. I mean, they're well understood, they're commoditized, and they're easy to charge for, right?
Right.
Which makes them perfect for these cloud deployments.
Right.
And likewise with infrastructure services, right? Like well-known, well-understood, pretty easy to charge for, because I know how to meter it more or less. Likewise with the software, but the platform I think is a really interesting question because. You don't really know. Well, first of all, there are very few complete platform services out there, right? It's not a very mature market yet. And I see agencies move from infrastructure as a service, and they kind of virtualize their stuff, and they're like, okay, good. I got gains from this. Let me start abstracting out other layers of my stack, right? And moving up into this platform service, they suddenly find like, oh, now that I've virtualized all this stuff and centralized to one place, I see a lot of redundancy, and I see opportunities for sharing services, et cetera. And the big challenge is that a lot of these applications are homegrown, and they find that each of the applications was built by a different vendor, right, a different integrator, and they find it difficult to refactor all those applications and get them moved more into a platform or a SIIA type model, and that's like a huge ceiling, I think, on being able to get the returns, right?
I'll just give you some examples, I think, of non-email that the federal government is using, and they're actually quite diverse just based on our experience. So the U.S. Army uses cloud computing for recruitment. NASA uses cloud computing for tech transfer. The U.S. Census used cloud computing in the 2010 census to manage all their 2,200 partners. The State Department uses cloud computing to manage nuclear non-proliferation projects and finance them around the world. The GSA uses cloud computing to manage its building services and its procurement services. So I think there is really a very wide range of different types of applications. Actually, I see Jay in the front row. So the New York City Schools is using cloud computing to manage their relations with 100,000 teachers. So you really, this is not just sort of an email data storage system. There are robust enterprise applications really across the board.
And I think the point that it really brings out is that cloud computing is not just doing the same things you did before cheaper, right? Which is, if we were at where we were in the conference 2 or 3 years ago, I think there was a lot of focus on that. It's not just about making changes on the back end. It's about doing things that you couldn't do before and that users couldn't do before. So from Google's perspective, we've now have the capability where you can take a picture on your mobile phone of something and actually search. So take a picture of a building and search and come back with the answer, what's that building or what's information on that building, or the cover of a book, or just about any object. Google Goggles will search it and the cloud will tell you what that is. With Google Docs, not only now can you have multiple people working the same document at the same time from desktop devices, but also now from mobile phones. Users are able to edit documents from a mobile phone, collaborating with others on a laptop, on a desktop, elsewhere. I think the video capabilities are another area where we really see big changes where the cloud is enabling new capabilities on a different scale that weren't available before.
So I think the advantage, the example of NASA JPL for their Mars rover project, when communicating with the Mars rover, they had about 2 hours window, and it took them about 90 minutes to crunch the data that they got, and took 20 minutes for them to make the decision and 10 minutes to communicate back. By using the high-performance computing cluster on Amazon, they reduced their crunching time to 20 minutes, so that gave them bulk of time to take the decision, right? So massive data analytics, Hadoop-type jobs. In fact, this recent supercomputing show conference, they rated the top supercomputers, and the HPC that Amazon offers came around somewhere in the 200s. The big difference is you don't have to pay millions, you pay just a couple of dollars an hour, under a couple of dollars an hour. So it enables a lot of ability to manipulate information. The other thing is, when the horse carriage, when the automobile first came out, it looked like a horseless carriage. That's all we are looking at today, right? The future is going to be just totally different, right? Once the electricity is pluggable, then all the appliances popped up once you had the pluggable interface. I think we still don't, we haven't scratched the surface in terms of what are the new applications coming. And the innovation is going to be so fast and so phenomenal that a year from now it'll be totally different.
Right.
Well, Terry, one of the things that we've put into the cloud service that we're offering, and it basically leverages a legacy application as part of the GSA, we're a certificate issuer for identity management. Right. Okay, so one of the things we're thinking about doing, and actually we're doing, is putting a certificate management virtual machine that you can scale up and scale down for 2-factor authentication before you can come into the cloud. The ability then allows you to then take that the next step and start issuing certificates and managing certificates with the cloud-based solution. So it's kind of taken an older legacy application that ran in client-server architecture before and then moving it into a cloud virtualized architecture.
I think there's, actually there's always parts when they start talking about all the ideas too, I go, that is so cool. But one of the things I heard also in an earlier conversation or panel too is about all the people. What the computer science engineers are doing today, what's the training associated with things. I think this is a huge issue. I happen to have a master's in information systems management, and so all I see when I hear all of this and all the different things that are going to happen, I think some of the other challenges, again, I always have to poke at the other stuff, is trying to do the governance model on top of all this. Because I have read the article, if you all haven't, from the litigators, who say, prove to me that that public piece of data that you have hasn't been tampered with. Because if you can't prove it, you can't use it in court. And all of a sudden, you just sort of go off on those kinds of things. Anybody want to comment about some of those challenges in our future? Or?
I'll tell you, 2 years ago, I sat on a panel, and it was 4 technologists, including myself, and then a lawyer. And every time the question got to the lawyer said, put it in the cloud and the lawyers will come. And I'm starting to learn this, right, as I work with our lawyers internally at Microsoft when we have these types of questions that our customers are asking us. What happens, right, when you have an email and that email happens to be stored outside of the country and they go and it needs to be put on legal hold, right? If that is happens to be in a favorable country, probably nothing bad. But if that data center happens to be in a country where they don't allow you to get that information, and it's even worse, by the way, on the outside for like folks in the UK who want to store their data here, right? They're extremely nervous because of the Patriot Act, which is a whole other big problem, right? I'll tell you that there's a huge push in even in the recent memo that Vivek just put out there. There's a big topic of this on regulatory reform, and we actually at a Brookings event a little over a year ago made some pretty bold statements in a white paper, really asking the government, the federal government, to take a leadership role in this space worldwide from a regulatory reform perspective. Because if you look at the telecommunications industry, the same thing happened there, right? And we need that same thing to happen, not only to protect the consumers, right, of these services, whether they be government or private sector, but also to protect us. I mean, the last thing, Microsoft would always sign a document for anybody saying, we'll happily give your data back. But the moment that regulatory commission comes in and shuts us down because of it, I mean, we won't be able to. And so that's a huge challenge. And I think that the rapid adoption because of the price pressures is going to drive that. And we're hoping, within a year, you're going to start to see these types of reforms. Yeah. And I think that will start to. Because it is, the lawyers get very, very nervous when you start to do the T's and C's on contracts around this.
Right, actually, and that's another somewhat of a challenge and potentially a barrier some days in some of these contracts and the negotiations that we're doing.
I also look at that problem first of all, if you were to tamper, right, you have to get physical access to it. I would contend that it is a lot more difficult to get physical access in cloud than in the regular world, right? In a caged environment where you kind of take this as caged is more protection, but by caging it, I know exactly where someone is located. In the cloud, you don't know where it is located. Now, that is not to be mistaken to say in the cloud where I don't know where my data is, because Amazon, your data is, we divide the cloud into regions and availability zones. You pick your jurisdiction where the data resides, but it's practically impossible to go and pick where in the data center it is. And then even if they get there, and they take it out, it's not one customer's data. I mean, it's not, it's hard.
And then you have the whole data leakage protection problem because now
That's
you can't find the data.
Right, and then there are access controls in terms of certificates all through, top to bottom, the chain, right? So there are so many more controls than the traditional world. So I think it's less of a problem than more of a problem.
Well, I think it's. I think it may be a problem, and especially with jurisdictional issues, right? Like data wanders into Turkey, who asserts control over all of the data that passes over its wires. Like that's scary stuff.
Problem.
But it's fortunately for the agencies, it's a problem for the providers, and not for the agencies necessarily. They want to be able to. It's a risk that they assume through the provider. Hopefully they have a contract that allows them to. In any case, but I think the more interesting. But I think
data sovereignty issue.
Yeah, no, we'd have a whole other panel on this.
Right.
But I think the more interesting governance question is the agencies internally, right? We touched on this at the beginning of the panel, is getting your house in order, right? So just basic blocking, tackling stuff operationally, like having standard builds for your systems. Being able to actually know all of the systems that we saw from the data center audit, agencies don't even know what's all in place. And so moving to the cloud allows for some additional discoverability that we didn't have before, allows us for some additional consolidation opportunities, and allows agencies to, as I say, get your house in order, do their homework, get your policies, procedures, and so on in place, which allows you to actually start taking advantage of these off-premise opportunities, right? And actually, I think one of the biggest returns an agency can get in this cloud move is using it as a forcing function to get their house in order, to clean up policies, procedures, better implementation of your general IT governance.
Well, I will say, coming out of that regulated environment from the telecom side of the house, believe it or not, we have a couple lawyers who do like to talk to us a lot. Not as much to me as my management, but that's why we drove to have a separate set of management platforms and replicate the technology just for federal, keep it in the US, keep it in borders, because we didn't want to get into these oversee issues and sorts of
Which
things.
brings the challenge then, are you really taking advantage of the true value of the cloud, right? That's
Well,
the promise of
let me
the
tell
cloud,
you
yeah.
this. So from an investment standpoint, we talked about that before, right?
Right.
We already have 2 data centers we stood up doing cloud. We stood up 2 more. So
Right.
to us, we just see this as 2 more data centers from a corporate investment strategy that we're doing. And the commercial technology we lose is the same technology in the federal space. So
We did the
do
same
view-
thing. We
view
did the
that
same
it
thing,
is.
and Google does the same thing. We all just, based on requirements, the government has come and told us we want data to stay in the United States, we want U.S.-only citizens, which kind of you start to go, okay, well, I'm really building a private community cloud, and that community has a limited number of people, which then gives you a limited ability to do the economies of scale. It's still better than private or on-premise from a cost perspective, but
Right,
it's the same challenge.
I could weigh in. We did not do that. The federal government, if you're at a low or moderate level security standard, there's no requirement that data has to stay in the United States. There was no requirement that only U.S. citizens can touch it. And Salesforce has one multi-tenant platform. We don't do private clouds. And we actually think that the real power of cloud computing is that multi-tenancy. And if suddenly you're in a position where you have to be buying hardware and software, you have to be doing upgrades and updates, you start eroding really the power of that cloud platform. So we have a different model and a different approach to the government, which is very kin to what we're offering to industry, because we think that's where the real power and exponential advantages
It'll be
are.
interesting as all that comes together, because actually from an Accenture perspective, where we do quite a bit of shared service managed services for the government, the U.S. citizen requirement in North America, in the U.S. only, and then with some of our Canadian operations as well, we have to have things separated too. So I'm not going to, it's okay that that's the policy, but I know that we've got the
Well, as you go higher up the
contractual
stack with
right.
classified and top
right.
secret data, then you hit that. But with
Actually-
moderate and low level,
Right.
that's often not the case.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we talked about earlier, which is the managed service elements of things. As this moves up, the commodities are taken somewhat care of, then the managed service elements become even more important. We only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to, one of our last questions, I wanted to comment too, because even in this banter back and forth, what you should be hearing is investments. And each company still has a significant amount of investment to make on this $80 billion industry or market that's been defined, right? And we're still making those investments. Now, I also was going to comment, it is important for the government, but it's also just as important in the commercial things that we all do. And we do benefit, and the government benefits from some of those investments that are sort of being made on a global basis. But there is that, U.S.-only citizen element that does come into play. So I just think, without even going into all the strategic details of what everyone's doing, the awareness should be there that the industry is supporting. It isn't one solution. The strategic roadmap, if you will, for all cloud computing is really based on applications, infrastructure, platforms, business processing, and initiatives like that. Does anybody want to just sort of give a few last words or comments on that? Are there any other barriers that you can see that we've gotten facing us? I think, I'll be honest, I think the government's been very open and direct about all these things. Now we need a few things to be done to get our companies, to continue the investment in this industry, right, or into this segment.
Yeah, I think you make a good point. I think we're all making investments. We've invested $2.5 billion in data centers, right, over the last 2 years. That's a lot of money.
It is.
Right? Right. We invested a lot in our network infrastructure. We're the 3rd largest network in the world. We don't really go to a Verizon to provide our network. We're 3rd behind DoD and L3. Right? Those are huge investments that the federal government can take advantage of. I think on the flip side, it's really encouraging to see that the cloud momentum hasn't slowed down. It's actually picked up, right, with Cloud First and with all the work being done with FedRAMP. And I think if there could be more things like FedRAMP that help solve some of these challenges, like what should be the de facto for certain types or categories of data. Right, for what defines moderate data, what defines public data. If those things could be standardized across the federal government, I think it'd be much easier, right, for government agencies to quickly determine and say, nope, this cloud application is perfect for this. And it's not, it was not an exact science, but I think some of those things right now are so different depending on which agency you talk to and where they're at in their life cycle. and frankly, who the people are that are there and how they view this, that it does make it difficult, except for the real traditional email applications to go to the cloud right now.
So Teresa, can I, because again,
Yes.
I think perhaps our model is orthogonal to some of your questions, so I just want to make sure that it's well understood. And that is, we have an enterprise-grade cloud platform. We are a pure-play cloud company. I guess you call us a public cloud. And when you talk about investments for the government, every time we make an investment for any of our customers, Citibank, Merrill Lynch, Cisco, Symantec, anytime we improve that industrial-grade enterprise platform, that is de facto an investment for the government, because we run all of our customers on that same platform. So I think we don't have a model where we have broken it up and we have to make investments for the federal government. Every time we invest a nickel in our model, that nickel goes to federal government abilities as well as commercial enterprise abilities.
I think from where, like apps.gov is headed, they look at today in a personal life, you just have an iPhone or a Google platform for mobile and just I'm downloading apps whenever I need it, right? Apps.gov for me is the federal or enterprise way up. You have an enterprise platform and then there are apps that you want to launch on an enterprise. That's where it is headed, and that's where I see, most of the vendors also, making that investment. Like Elastic Beanstalk that Amazon offers is one example of, you have a Java application, don't worry about the backend scaling, servers setting up, all that. You just point your Java application, you have it running in minutes, right? So that's where it is headed.
Just one last thing. I know that, again, we're not an application-specific cloud, more of an infrastructure platform approach. And again, what we want to do is to move into and the investment's going to be for everything as a service and move things in slowly. So the big thing for us is the hybrid approach and the interoperability between clouds and the ability to move around between different clouds and accessibility.
Okay. Unless there's other comments, if anybody wants to ask a question of any of the panelists, we'd be glad to answer a question. Yes?
This just has to do with transparency, and it kind of goes both ways. I understand you're cloud providers, but I will just say that there's folklore I've heard in the last 6 months where a cloud provider went to an agency and was denied because they did not meet the agency's requirements, but then when they said, what are your requirements, the agency didn't hand it over. That's one scenario. On the flip side, when it comes to truly understanding dashboard transparency and how much you're willing to disclose to give the customer, whether it's government or commercial, information that makes them feel comfortable, especially with one point that one person made earlier today, which is when the compliance requirements change, they have the ability to modify and manipulate those requirements once they've handed you the data. Is there anything you can share kind of collectively on how you delineate between what you're willing to share without giving away the data for the bad guys or without opening the kimono too much on your business efficiencies and competitive edge? Because dashboard transparency is the keys to the keys to the kingdom.
I have some, I think it's a great question, and I think it's a very important question that agencies are dealing with today. And the point that I like to make is cloud computing is computing. And so the government has dealt with these issues in dealing with outsourcing providers for decades. And in terms of outsourcing providers, managing information, having access to the government's information. So if you understand and accept that cloud computing is a different way of doing computing, but it is computing, then we understand that the model that NIST has laid out, for example, in the 853 controls, applies to computing. It can be applied and empirically understood that security controls are in place and evaluated to understand the level of residual risk that's there of using a system. And that's what we really encourage agencies to do, rather than thinking about kind of these labels of cloud computing as a proxy for security, right? As assuming that a private cloud by its nature must be more secure because it is private. It may be more secure, But just by calling it private doesn't make it secure. There may not be locks on the doors at the data center. The servers may not have been patched in the last 5 years. It's private, but it actually may not be secure. So you examine these hundreds of security controls that NIST has developed over the years, and you use those security controls to apply it to the system. And then you're extremely transparent with the appropriate individuals at the agency who manage security to let them review a full package that's been completed and documented, evaluated by an independent auditor, again, all to the FISMA standards, and they review that system as part of their inventory, like they review all the other systems in the agency's inventory. So that's our point of view.
There's some.
Google,
Right.
That's one of the best responses I've heard. Thank you. You're right. The logs are open. The data is there.
Well, and there's also some great, so there's some great technology that actually fell out of the federal desktop core configuration work, which is called SCAP, the Federal Desktop Core Configuration,
FDCC?
the FDCC. So out of that came the SCAP protocol, which I know you're interested in and we're extremely interested in. It provides a way of basically creating a set of machine-readable rules that you can use to basically interrogate a system and say, basically, this is my security posture. Please audit yourself against this posture. And then produce a set of, again, machine-readable results, which makes it really easy to audit like a large number of systems at the same time. So I think you were referring to more contractual assurances, right? Having independent auditors and the rest of it. But there's also some great work going on at NIST that allows for the kind of automated and kind of ongoing assurance. So if somebody wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning and wants to check on their servers, they can hit a button and get an audit back.
So,
Right.
right. So if you look at it, it shouldn't be a black box, right?
Right.
Most people, it shouldn't just be about an SLA, and it really shouldn't be just about FISMA. Right? FISMA is an important standard, but that's just a set of security controls. And the way it typically works today, that's a once a year evaluated process. A lot of things happen within a year. And so it really is all about the processes of managing those controls, right? And when you say continuous monitoring, organizations, including Microsoft, that provide these services should be very transparent about this. You should be able to see what their internal processes look like. What did they do if there's actually a leak, right? How do they know if there is a challenge? How do they fix that, regardless of whether they have a FISMA moderate or high, or an ISO, or a SAS 70, right? Those are all good things and all things we should all be doing, right? But it's much bigger than that, right? And it's a lot about the people in the process, right, as well as the technology. And they're all things that we've all talked about for a long time, but I think we need to do those and be transparent about how we do those. So for in Microsoft, for our customers right now, we take them on data center tours. They're allowed to see our operations rooms. They're allowed to see all the tools that we have to actually to go down to the individual server and CPUs to be able to see what, if anything's been intruded on, and we actually share all that under NDA.
And Teresa,
so it's not a black box.
Can I just add one more comment? So Salesforce has something called trust.salesforce.com, HTTPS. It shows the real-time status of our system. So you can go on there and you can look at all of the instances. You can see if there are any problems. You can click security. You can see all the security attacks we're getting. You can look at all the privacy policies. You see how many transactions. I think we're about at 400 million a day now. And so it is a public dashboard which gives anyone,
Marketing. So it's not as a customer.
anyone, regulators, competitors, customers, other tech companies, anybody can go in and see how our system is performing that day, if there are any outages, if there are any security issues, how fast transactions are getting processed. So we do offer that to our customers.
And one of the things from being an infrastructure and a platform provider, it's a little bit easier because when we set up the environments for our customers, we give them all the real-time metrics. So they can go in and how much bandwidth they're using, how much storage you're using, how much CPU, all those sorts of things to manage their environment, right? So, yeah.
It's all about the instrumentation of this.
Exactly.
Versus how we used to do things before. If you look at FedRAMP, I think there was a control that said they wanted all the logs delivered weekly, and we were like, wow, that'd be like a dump truck full. Yeah. How are we going to do that, right?
We have
So
the
I think we
RFP
need
for
to,
storage.
we have to morph those controls a little bit and add a lot of instrumentation on top of it,
Right.
so that people can peer into it and get this type of real-time information. It's a lot different than just a rack of servers sitting somewhere in a data center, and I think that's really where the value of all the work industry's doing with FedRAMP is going to really shine.
And
right, is there.
compliance and security in cloud is really a shared responsibility. The customer still retains a lot of control. It's amazing. Like for Amazon, after that, right from the operating system, hardening, how we access control, Amazon doesn't have any access to any of those systems, right? And it's amazing how many times I meet with customers and they're surprised, wow, and happy that they really still gain so much control, right? But what we talk about is as if there is no control, but there's a lot of control.
So the best answers. 6 months of people asking this question, you guys.
I want to thank the panel and Gala coming together. Actually, we didn't even, we did a lot via email, and I think we got the questions that you wanted us to do, and I appreciate you guys' openness, and thank you very much, and thank you all.
Thank you.